My parents sold me off to marry a billionaire's dog. $12 million. That's what I was worth. And it all started like this. Let me tell you my story. My name is Blessing, and I was just 16. The only girl in a family brimming with 6 children. But blessing? Not for me. Being a girl in my family was more like a curse. Unspoken, yet etched into every facet of my existence. The last to be fed, the one they looked right through as if I were invisible. My 5 brothers had uniforms, gleaming books, and dreams as vast as the sky above. I had rags, a bucket, and a never-ending list of chores that stretched on like an old, worn-out road. Each morning, I rose before the sun even thought about peeking over the horizon, setting the water to boil, cooking, sweeping, scrubbing until my hands were raw. I packed my brothers' lunchboxes, my hands trembling slightly, not from excitement, but from the sheer weight of the task. A thank you was never uttered, never expected. Why would it be? I was simply fulfilling my preordained purpose, what girls were born to do, a silent cog in the family machine. Literacy was a foreign concept to me. I'd never stepped foot inside a classroom, never felt the weight of a book in my hands. Once, just once, I begged my mother to allow me to attend school. Her response was a slap so forceful it left my ears ringing for hours. Who will cook for your brothers if you're in school? You want them to starve? She snapped, her eyes blazing with a cold fury. They were constantly telling me that girls didn't need school, didn't need knowledge. You'll get married one day. That's your only job. My job. As if I were merely born to serve, a vessel devoid of dreams. So, I learned how to cook instead of how to count, how to scrub instead of how to write, how to obey instead of how to dream. My bed was a thin, tattered mat in the corner of the room, often damp and cold. My brothers had beds, plush pillows, the luxury of comfort. I had the cold, hard floor and the leftovers of every meal, often cold, dry, and sometimes already buzzing with flies. Even animals in the wild feasted better than I did, my father once callously remarked. No one celebrated my birthday, no one embraced me, no one ever inquired if I was okay. I was simply there. And yet, amidst the harsh realities of that cruel existence, a tiny ember of hope refused to be extinguished. Maybe one day Mama would embrace me. Maybe Papa would finally say, I'm proud of you, Blessing. Maybe my brothers would cease treating me like a ghost. I didn't crave extravagance, just a flicker of acknowledgement. But I was naive, because one day, my brother fell ill, and everything spiraled into chaos. Collins, my eldest brother, staggered home from school, clutching his head, moaning in agony. Panic seized Mama. Is it malaria? Typhoid? God, please no. That night he vomited twice, his body racked with tremors. By morning he collapsed, his limbs failing him as he attempted to stand. Daddy scooped him up in his arms as if he were handling royalty, the crown prince of the land. They rushed him to the hospital, shouting for the neighbors to assist, their voices laced with desperation. I was forbidden from going, left behind to scrub the floor, listening to the relentless ticking of the clock. My stomach churned, not only from fear for Collins, but from the dread of what was to come. In my family, when things went awry, the blame invariably circled back to me, the convenient scapegoat. When they returned, my father resembled a ghost, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Mama's eyes were red and swollen, her face a mask of grief. My brothers sat in stunned silence, a phenomenon unheard of until then. Then Daddy spoke, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He has a tumor in his brain. He needs surgery. How much? My mother whispered, her voice barely audible. 12 million, he replied, the words hanging heavy in the air. 12 million? That was more money than we had ever seen, more than we could even dare to dream of. The following days were a maelstrom of panic and desperation. My parents sold everything they owned. Their dilapidated Toyota, the flickering TV, even the generator that only functioned on the most auspicious of days. Mama removed her beloved coral beads and handed them to a jeweler, weeping silently throughout the entire transaction. But it still wasn't enough. They begged relatives, pleaded with friends, but no one could provide the astronomical sum required. Church members offered prayers, but prayers don't pay for brain surgery. Collins grew weaker, his condition deteriorating rapidly. He stopped eating, his once bright eyes now clouded and gray. Then, one night, Mama entered the room where I lay on my tattered mat. She stood over me for what felt like an eternity, her shadow stretching across the floor like a foreboding omen. Then, in a voice as cold and sharp as metal, she uttered, Blessing, there's one last way. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding against my ribs. What way, Mama? She lowered her voice to a mere whisper. There's a rich man in the city. He's offering a fortune to any family willing to give their daughter in marriage to his dog. I blinked, my mind struggling to comprehend her words. What? My heart stopped, frozen in disbelief. You want me to marry a dog? She didn't flinch, her gaze unwavering. We need that money, Blessing. This is your chance to help your brother, to help this family. I stared at her, speechless, too stunned to even muster a single tear. Initially, I dismissed it as a cruel joke, a grotesque jest concocted in the depths of despair. Who marries a dog? What kind of mother proposes such a thing to her own child? But when I looked into her eyes, I saw something that chilled me far more than her words. She was serious, deadly serious. I shook my head slowly, a silent plea for her to retract her statement. Mama, you can't mean it. I'm a human being. She straightened up, as if my words were an insult, an affront to her authority. Don't be foolish, Blessing. This isn't about feelings. This is about survival. For Collins? I asked, my voice trembling. For this family. She snapped, her patience wearing thin. Your brother is dying. You think we'll just stand by and let him die while you sit here breathing, doing nothing? Tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and stinging. But Mama, I'm only 16. She rolled her eyes in exasperation and turned to leave the room. I sat there for hours, hugging my knees, praying that this was merely a horrific nightmare from which I would soon awaken. But the nightmare was only just beginning. The following morning, my father summoned me to the sitting room. My mother was already there, seated regally like a queen upon her throne. My brothers were positioned around her like loyal courtiers. None of them met my gaze with even a glimmer of compassion. Blessing. My father began, his voice devoid of warmth. You're going to be married. I blinked, my heart plummeting into the pit of my stomach. To whom? I asked, the word barely audible. He didn't hesitate, his face impassive. To the rich man's dog. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. No, please. This can't be real. His face hardened into stone. This isn't a request. We've accepted the offer. He's paying 12 million. 12 million? That was my worth to them. 12 million for me. My legs gave out, and I crumpled to the floor, a broken heap of despair. I'm not a thing to be sold, I cried, my voice cracking with anguish. You should be grateful that anyone wants you. My father growled, his eyes flashing with anger. You've been nothing but a burden for 16 years. I turned to my mother, my last hope, desperate for a sign of mercy. Mama, please, I'm your daughter. She averted her gaze, her voice cold and distant. You should be thankful. You'll finally be useful. Those words shattered something within me, extinguishing the last flicker of hope. I wasn't a child to them, I was a mere transaction, a payment. I attempted to flee, but my father blocked my path, his face a mask of fury. Before I could utter another word, he struck me, the force of the blow sending stars exploding behind my eyes. I collapsed to the floor, my lip bleeding, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. You will go, he declared, his voice final and unwavering. And that's the end of it. Then, they dragged me to my room and locked the door, leaving me alone with my despair. As I lay there on the floor, shaking, broken, and bleeding, I realized something I had desperately tried to ignore for years. Love did not reside within those walls. Only duty. And I was the sacrifice. I must have succumbed to exhaustion and fallen asleep amidst my tears, because I awoke to the sound of my mother carelessly throwing clothes into a small nylon bag. My clothes, torn skirts, worn-out wrappers, her faded gown I used to wear to church, back when I was still permitted to attend. She didn't utter a single word, her face a blank canvas. She just packed, her movements swift and efficient. I stood up slowly, my legs weak and trembling. Where are you sending me? She remained silent, her eyes fixed on the task at hand. She zipped the bag shut and thrust it into my arms, her touch devoid of any warmth. Wash your face, she instructed coldly. The driver will be here soon. Driver? Was I really going through with this? Were they truly sending me off to marry a dog? I stood frozen, praying for a miracle, hoping that someone would intervene, that my mother would have a change of heart, that one of my brothers would finally find the courage to say, this isn't right. But no one did. They acted as if it were just another day, a mundane event devoid of any significance. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black car pulled into our compound. A man in a tailored suit emerged, his presence exuding wealth and sophistication. He looked far too affluent to be associated with people like us, with our poverty and desperation. My father rushed out to greet him, his face contorted into a servile smile. My mother seized my arm and dragged me forward, her grip tight and unforgiving. The man scrutinized me, his gaze cold and assessing, before turning to my father. This is the girl? Yes, sir. My father replied proudly, his voice dripping with deference. That's our blessing. The man examined me as if I were livestock at a market, his eyes lingering on my thin frame and unkempt appearance. She looks healthy. Good. Healthy? Not beautiful, not intelligent, just healthy, as if I were a goat being judged for its meat. He handed my father a thick envelope. My father tore it open, counted the money with trembling hands, and his smile widened, revealing stained and broken teeth. She's all yours now, he said, his voice dripping with insincerity. The man nodded curtly. Follow me, girl. I turned to my mother one last time, pleading with her for a sign of compassion, but she didn't even acknowledge me, her gaze fixed on some distant point. My feet felt like lead weights dragging me down. Still, I climbed into the car, my body numb with despair. The door slammed shut, sealing my fate. The engine roared to life, and as we drove away, I looked back at the house I once called home. No one waved, no one cried, no one cared. That was the day I left my family. Not for love, not for education, not for a better life, but to be wedded to a dog. The ride was long and silent, the tension palpable. I sat in the back seat, clutching the small nylon bag as if it were the only tangible piece of my former life. We passed towering buildings, crowded streets teeming with life, before turning into quieter, more affluent neighborhoods where the houses resembled palaces. Finally, we arrived at our destination, a wide avenue lined with trees and vibrant flowers. At the end of the avenue stood a massive golden gate, its intricate designs glinting in the sunlight. It opened slowly, as if by magic, and the car rolled through. The mansion before me was the grandest structure I had ever laid eyes on. White marble walls, sparkling windows reflecting the sun's rays. A fountain danced in the center of the compound, its water shimmering like diamonds. Was this where the dog resided? The driver opened the door, his expression indifferent. Come down, he said flatly. My legs trembled as I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I followed him through the imposing front doors, my senses overwhelmed by the sheer opulence of the place. Inside, the air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of roses, polished wood, and something else, something ancient and indefinable. The hallway stretched on endlessly, lined with ornate mirrors reflecting my bewildered expression and glittering chandeliers casting a warm glow. My bare feet sank into the plush, velvety carpet. Two women in black uniforms passed us, their heads bowed, their faces expressionless. They didn't speak, they didn't even acknowledge my presence. Finally, we reached a pair of tall, imposing double doors. The man opened them, and there he was, the dog, sitting regally on a raised cushion like a king upon his throne. He was nothing like I had anticipated. White fur, piercing blue eyes, massive and still, exuding an aura of power, quiet yet commanding. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The man beside me bowed slightly, his voice respectful. "Master," he said, "your bride has arrived." My knees locked, my throat constricted. The dog's eyes met mine, and something passed between us. Something cold, something old, something unsettling. Then he stood, his movements graceful and deliberate. He was even larger than I had initially perceived, his head held high, his fur gleaming like silk, a diamond-studded collar sparkling around his neck. He didn't growl, he didn't bark, he simply stared. Those eyes, too blue, too human, seemed to hold centuries of sorrow and experience, as if they had witnessed every conceivable kind of pain. The man in the suit turned to me, his voice soft but firm. "Bow," he instructed. I blinked, my mind struggling to process his command. "What? Bow to your husband?" I looked at him as if he were insane, but his eyes conveyed that this was not a request. It was an order. Slowly, hesitantly, I bent my knees and lowered my head, my body trembling uncontrollably. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. When I looked up, the dog was closer, his presence overwhelming. He circled me slowly, sniffing the air, his paws silent on the velvet rug. I remained motionless, barely breathing, fearing what he might do. When he stopped in front of me, he tilted his head, studying me with an unnerving intensity. Then, to my utter shock, he nodded, a subtle gesture of acceptance. The man in the suit smiled slightly, his eyes devoid of warmth. He accepts you, accepts me, as if I were a piece of property, a possession to be acquired. I didn't know whether to feel relieved, terrified, or utterly cursed. The man clapped twice, his hands meeting with a sharp, echoing sound. Two maids entered the room, their movements mechanical and precise. They led me to another room, even more lavish than the last. This one was grand and golden, dominated by a bed larger than our entire kitchen back home. Velvet curtains cascaded from the ceiling. A glittering chandelier illuminated the space, and a mirror framed in gold reflected my pale and frightened face. It looked like a princess's room, but I was no princess. I was a girl who had been sold. The door shut behind me with a resounding click, sealing my fate. Locked. I rushed to the door and tried the handle, but it didn't budge. The window was sealed shut, with iron bars on the outside, further solidifying my captivity. Somewhere in the mansion, my so-called husband was waiting, his presence looming over me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my body shaking uncontrollably. Tears poured down my face, soaking into the silk sheets. I didn't know what they wanted from me, what twisted purpose I was meant to serve. But I knew that this wasn't just about money anymore. This was something darker, something more sinister, something no one had warned me about. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed, drawing my knees up to my chest, staring at the locked door, my mind racing with questions. What was this place? Who was that creature? What had I been dragged into? At dawn, I heard the soft pad of footsteps approaching my door, followed by a gentle knock. The door opened slowly, revealing a young woman dressed in a black and white uniform. Her face was blank, her eyes tired and haunted. She looked to be about 20, but something about her presence felt much older, as if she had witnessed too much suffering in her short life. "Good morning," she said gently, her voice soft and melodic. "My name is Mara. I'm here to explain the rules." "Rules?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. She placed a silver tray on a side table, laden with warm bread, eggs, and fresh fruit. She then stood still, her hands folded neatly in front of her, her posture impeccable. "There are 3 rules in this house," she stated, her voice unwavering. "Break them and the consequences will be severe." I sat up slowly, my body tense with apprehension. What kind of consequences? Her voice remained calm, almost unnervingly so. 1. Never leave your room without permission. 2. Never try to run away. 3. Never disobey the master. I stared at her, my mind reeling from her words. "The master?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You mean the dog?" Her lips pressed together in a thin line, but she nodded, her eyes betraying a flicker of sadness. "He's not just a dog, is he?" I whispered, my heart pounding with a growing sense of dread. She hesitated for a moment, then offered a faint, sad smile. "No, he isn't." My heart twisted with a sudden, sharp pain. "What do you mean?" Mira finally met my eyes, her gaze filled with a mixture of pity and resignation. "He's cursed," she said quietly. "Long ago, and if the curse isn't broken soon, he'll remain like this, forever." I swallowed hard, my throat dry and constricted. "Cursed? Forever? Only the heart of a girl who truly loves him," she continued, her voice barely audible, "can break the spell." I felt dizzy, my mind struggling to comprehend the absurdity of the situation. Love with a beast? How was that even possible? "Why me?" I asked, my voice filled with despair. Mira didn't blink, her expression unchanging. "He chose you, your blood, your spirit. Something about you gives him hope." Hope? That word sounded foreign and out of place in this opulent prison. I glanced at the untouched food on the tray, my stomach churning with anxiety. I wasn't hungry, my appetite having vanished entirely. What happens if I follow the rules? I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. You'll be safe, she replied, her eyes unwavering. And if you help him break the curse, you'll be free. Free? It sounded like a hollow promise, a cruel illusion designed to keep me compliant. But I had no other choice, no other avenue to explore. Mira turned to leave, then paused at the door, her hand resting on the ornate handle. You may think this place is a prison, she said, her voice barely audible. But it's safer than what waits beyond the gates. Then, she disappeared into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone with my fear and uncertainty. I stared at the tray of food, the golden mirror, the velvet curtains, the symbols of my gilded cage. Cursed rules, a beast for a husband, a life dictated by magic and despair. What kind of life had I been thrust into? The next morning, I awoke to the scent of roses and something warm and inviting, baking bread, perhaps even cake. For a fleeting moment, I forgot where I was, my mind still clinging to the remnants of a peaceful dream. I opened my eyes, expecting to see the cracked ceiling of our humble village hut. But instead, I was greeted by velvet curtains, a marble floor that gleamed like glass, and a golden mirror reflecting the image of a stranger. Me. And then, the reality of my situation crashed down upon me like a tidal wave. I was in a mansion, married to a dog, my life irrevocably altered. I sat up slowly, the weight of everything pressing down on me with suffocating force. What would today bring? Another test? Another rule to follow? A soft knock broke the silence, shattering my thoughts. The door opened, and Mira stepped in, her expression calm and composed, but her eyes held something softer this time, almost akin to kindness. In her hands was a beautiful blue dress, made of silk and adorned with tiny pearls stitched along the sleeves. Good morning, Blessing, she said gently, her voice soothing. The master wishes to walk with you. He asked that you wear this. I blinked, my mind struggling to comprehend her words. He wants to walk with me? She nodded, her gaze unwavering. He enjoys the East Garden. The roses are blooming. I hesitated for a moment, then reached for the dress. It felt like something from a dream, soft, cool, and impossibly expensive. I had never worn anything like it in my life. Mira helped me get dressed, her touch gentle and efficient. She brushed my hair carefully, tying it back with a silken ribbon, transforming me from a frightened village girl into something resembling a lady. I moved slowly, cautiously, as if I were stepping into a life that didn't belong to me. The hallway was quiet and still when I stepped out of the room, the silence broken only by the soft rustling of my silk dress. The staff moved like shadows, polite, silent, and unreadable, their faces devoid of emotion. No one spoke, no one acknowledged my presence. We passed golden-framed paintings depicting scenes of grandeur, velvet-lined walls exuding opulence, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars, illuminating the path ahead. Then I stepped outside. Sunlight greeted me, warm and golden, bathing the world in a radiant glow. The garden was alive with vibrant colors and intoxicating scents, roses in every conceivable shade of crimson, ivory, and gold, their petals unfurling in the gentle breeze. The air was thick with perfume, the sweet fragrance of the blossoms mingling with something older, deeper, something almost mystical. And in the center of it all, sitting silently amidst the blooming roses, was him, the dog, his white fur glowing in the sunlight, a golden chain encircling his neck. His eyes, those deep, haunting blue eyes, were fixed on the sky, as if he were remembering another life, another world. When he saw me, he stood, his movements graceful and deliberate. And then, I heard him, not with my ears, but inside my mind, a voice low, calm, and filled with an indescribable sorrow. You're afraid of me, I gasped, stumbling back, my hand flying to my mouth in shock. You can talk? I stammered, my voice barely audible. Only to the one chosen to break the curse. The voice replied, its tone both gentle and resigned. My mouth went dry, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. You're not just a dog. He lowered his head slightly, as if ashamed of his true form. I was once a man, a prince. I stared at him, stunned and disbelieving. A prince. My name was Coda, he said, the words carrying a weight that belied their simplicity. Prince Coda of Ibanram. The name felt like thunder, resonating within my very being. I had never heard it before, yet somehow it carried the weight of history, the echo of a forgotten legend. Coda, I repeated, testing the sound on my tongue. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. I was proud, cold, and blind to everything but power. I ruled with a hard heart, and for that I was cursed. He paused in front of a dark red rose, its petals velvety soft, and stared at it, his blue eyes filled with a profound sadness. These were my mother's favorite, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. She planted them before she died. I stepped closer, drawn to him by an invisible force. What happened to her? I asked softly, my voice filled with genuine concern. He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. My pride killed her, he said at last, his voice devoid of anger, only sorrow. I didn't know what to say, what words could possibly mend something so broken. So, I said nothing, offering only my presence, my silent understanding. I just stood beside him, our silence a shared burden. The wind rustled through the flowers, carrying their sweet fragrance on the breeze. A single petal, crimson red and velvety soft, floated to the ground, a silent testament to the fragility of life. And in that quiet garden, something strange and unexpected began to happen. Two broken souls, one cursed by magic, the other by cruelty, stood side by side, not talking about love, not dreaming of destiny, just sharing the silence, finding solace in each other's presence. And though I didn't know it yet, something inside both of us had begun to shift. Something real, something profound, something that might ultimately save us both. The days that followed passed like a quiet dream, a gentle respite from the harsh realities of my past. Every morning, I walked with Coda in the East Garden. The scent of roses and the warmth of the sun, a balm to my wounded soul. The mansion still felt strange, like a place I didn't belong. A gilded cage adorned with velvet and gold. But the garden was different. It felt safe, peaceful, alive. A sanctuary where I could finally breathe. At first, I kept my distance from Coda, wary of his presence, unsure of his intentions. But slowly, gradually, I stopped flinching when he came near, my fear giving way to a tentative curiosity. He never barked, never growled, never displayed any signs of aggression. He just watched me with those deep blue eyes that seemed to carry centuries of silence, eyes that reflected the pain and sorrow of a life lived under a curse. One morning, we sat beneath the shade of the old sycamore tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. The breeze rustled the leaves, creating a soothing melody. Somewhere in the distance, birds sang, their cheerful chirping a stark contrast to the sorrow that permeated our existence. And I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me since I first learned of his curse. Why were you cursed? Coda didn't answer right away. His gaze fixed on the clouds drifting lazily across the sky. I broke the heart of someone who truly loved me, he said at last, his voice barely audible. I mocked her, used her, and then threw her away like a discarded toy. My chest tightened with a mixture of sympathy and condemnation. Was she a witch? I asked quietly, my voice filled with trepidation. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. But her mother was. I waited, my breath held captive in my lungs. The witch came to me disguised as a poor maiden. She begged for shelter, for a moment's respite from the harsh elements. I laughed at her, called her ugly, dirty, unworthy of my attention. I didn't care who she was. I saw only a beggar at my door. He sighed, a sound heavy with regret. That night, she returned in her true form, her eyes blazing with fury, and cursed me, transforming me into the beast you see before you. His voice never rose, never betrayed any anger or resentment. He didn't sound bitter, just tired, as if the weight of the curse had worn him down over the years. She said I would remain a beast, he continued, until someone who had suffered more than I had could look at me and not run. Someone pure, someone kind, someone capable of seeing beyond the monstrous facade and recognizing the man within. He turned to me slowly, his blue eyes piercing my soul. I swallowed hard, my throat constricted. Why me? You were not brought here to save me, he said gently, his voice devoid of any expectation. You were sold. That is your truth. But maybe fate, or perhaps something more, brought you here for a reason, a purpose beyond our understanding. I looked at him, my heart filled with a strange mixture of pity and understanding. He had once been cruel, arrogant, and selfish, just like my parents, just like my brothers. But now he was trapped, caged by a curse, just like me. Do you believe the curse can be broken? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the horizon. I used to hope, he said at last, his voice laced with a hint of weariness. But every girl they brought here ran, screamed, called me a monster. Some fainted. One even tried to stab me. None ever stayed. None ever saw anything beyond the beast. I thought of the way my parents had handed me over, their faces devoid of any emotion. No goodbye, no tears, just money on the table, the price of my freedom. And here I was, sitting next to a beast who listened better, who understood me better than anyone ever had. Then he asked, if you could leave right now, if the gates opened and your parents begged you to return, would you go? I closed my eyes, allowing the memories to flood my mind. I remembered the cold kitchen floor, the bruises that blossomed on my skin, the constant silence, the way they fed me last, the way they never said they loved me. No, I whispered, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. I'd rather stay with a cursed dog than go back to people who sold me like meat. Coda looked at me then, his eyes filled not with sorrow, but with something warmer, something akin to hope. You're different, he said, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. I didn't know how to respond, but something inside me, something buried under years of pain and neglect, was beginning to stir. Something soft, something real, something powerful. The mansion no longer felt like a cage, but rather, a place of endless possibilities. I found myself exploring new rooms filled with impossible things. Books that whispered secrets, candles that floated in midair, a garden that changed colors with my mood. And somehow, Coda was always near, watching over me, protecting me from the shadows that lurked in the corners of the mansion. Sometimes from a distance, sometimes watching silently from the doorway, but always near. I started talking to him more, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. He listened, truly listened, without judgment or interruption. When I told him how Mama said I was useless, he didn't brush it off or dismiss my feelings. When I told him how I cried into my mat at night, longing for a life beyond my reach, he didn't say, be strong, or get over it. He just said, you didn't deserve that. His voice filled with genuine empathy, and I knew deep down that he meant it. One morning, I came downstairs and found the dining table set for two, a lavish spread of food laid out on the finest china. Coda was waiting at the head of the table, his white fur gleaming in the sunlight streaming through the windows. When he saw me, he stood, his movements graceful and deliberate. Would you join me for breakfast? He asked, his voice soft and inviting. I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, chasing away the shadows of the past. I'd like that very much, I replied. At first, we ate in silence, enjoying the quiet companionship. But then, we started to talk, sharing stories and laughter, breaking down the barriers that separated us. I told him how I once hid my brother's report card so I could feel like I was going to school too, just for a fleeting moment. He let out a low growl, a sound that surprised me. "That's not funny, Blessing," he said, his voice laced with disapproval. "You should have been in school, learning and growing, not stuck at home scrubbing floors." His anger didn't scare me. It warmed me. It meant he cared, that he saw my worth, that he believed I deserved more than the life I had been given. After breakfast, his tone changed, becoming more serious. "There's something I want to show you," he said, his eyes filled with a sense of purpose. "A secret room." We walked behind the library, pushing aside a heavy bookshelf to reveal a narrow staircase lit with soft, golden light. At the bottom of the staircase was a glass chamber, glowing from within with an ethereal light. In the center of the chamber stood a single giant rose, its petals golden and shimmering, as if it were somehow alive. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice filled with awe. "This," he said softly, his voice filled with sadness, "is the heart of the curse." He turned toward me, his blue eyes filled with an unspeakable sorrow. "If that rose dies before I am truly loved, not pitted, not feared, but truly loved for who I am, I will remain this way forever, a beast trapped within a gilded cage." I stared at the shimmering petals, breathless, because I knew that this time, it wasn't just his story. It was mine, too. Our fates were intertwined, bound together by a curse and a glimmer of hope. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of Coda, the curse, and the golden rose. I sat by the window, watching the moon rise, full and silver, its light glowing like a beacon in the darkness. The future stretched before me, uncertain and unknown, but for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference, that I could help break the curse and find my own freedom in the process. A secret hung in the sky, thick and heavy, and I found myself consumed, unable to banish the image of the golden rose from my mind. It wasn't merely a beautiful object. It thrummed with a life of its own, a silent symphony of light and shadow. The petals, kissed by an unseen breeze, shimmered with an almost ethereal quality, as though the rose itself was drawing breath. Each delicate tremble felt like a whispered secret, a haunting premonition, a subtle warning against a danger I couldn't quite grasp. What unbearable anguish, I wondered, could imprison a soul within the grotesque facade of a beast? What profound, ancient curse demanded not the flashy theatrics of magic, but the quiet, unwavering power of genuine love to shatter its hold? Coda had offered little explanation after revealing the rose to me. He'd simply turned, shoulders slumped with a weight that seemed to crush him from within, and walked away. But his profound sadness lingered, a tangible presence that permeated the very stones of the castle, clinging to the tapestries and whispering through the echoing halls. "I must be truly loved," he'd said, his voice barely a murmur, "or I'll remain this way, forever." But how could I possibly bestow such a potent emotion, such a boundless gift, upon someone I didn't fully comprehend? How could anyone? Love demanded understanding, empathy, a connection that transcended the superficial. The following morning, driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desperate hope, I found myself drawn back to the labyrinthine library. Towering bookshelves lined every wall, stretching towards the vaulted ceiling. Some volumes were coated in a thick layer of dust, silent witnesses to centuries of neglect. Others glowed with an inner light, beckoning me closer. My fingers danced across their spines, tracing the faded titles, until one particular book pulsed faintly beneath my touch, resonating with an unseen energy. I carefully pulled it from the shelf. Asterisk, The Curse of the Forgotten Prince. Asterisk, the title seemed to hum with an ominous vibration. With trembling hands, I opened its ancient pages. The text unfolded the tragic tale of a young prince, renowned for his kindness, yet plagued by an unbearable arrogance. He possessed immense power, but suffered from profound loneliness. One fateful day, a wizened old woman, cloaked in rags, appeared at his imposing gates, humbly begging for shelter from the encroaching storm. The prince, blinded by his own self-importance, erupted in scornful laughter. He mocked her appearance, ridiculed her pleas, and cruelly turned her away. Unbeknownst to him, she was no mere beggar, but a formidable sorceress in disguise. Enraged by his callous behavior, she unleashed her fury upon him. That very night, she cast a devastating curse, transforming him into a grotesque beast, destined to remain trapped within his monstrous form until someone possessed the ability to look beyond the terrifying exterior, the fur, the teeth, the rage, and recognize the compassionate man hidden deep within. With bated breath, I turned to the last page. The words shimmered with an almost blinding gold, radiating a palpable sense of hope and desperation. Asterisk, only the purest form of love, freely given without condition, can break the spell. I closed the book, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just a dusty legend, a forgotten fairy tale. This was Coda's reality. And now, inexplicably, this story had become inextricably intertwined with my own destiny. That night, guided by an unseen force, I found him in the sprawling rose garden, utterly alone beneath the watchful gaze of the stars. The roses surrounding him seemed to glow in the ethereal moonlight, casting long, dancing shadows. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the heavens, as though searching for answers to questions that had haunted him for an eternity. I approached him silently, hesitant to break the fragile peace that enveloped him. I didn't speak a word. Instead, I simply stepped forward slowly, extending my hand towards him in a silent invitation. "Dance with me?" I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me, his expression a mixture of bewilderment, pain, and a flicker of fragile hope, as though I'd uttered a long-forgotten spell. Dance? He asked, his voice raspy with disuse. Blessing, I don't look like someone you dance with. I shook my head, dismissing his protest with a gentle smile. I didn't ask what you look like. I asked you to dance. Uncertain, his massive paw hesitantly settled into my hand. His touch was rough, calloused, and undeniably powerful, but I didn't flinch. I held on, offering him a silent reassurance. Leading him gently, I guided him towards a small clearing beneath the ancient sycamore tree, its branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. There was no music, no orchestra, no prearranged score, only the soft rustling of leaves in the night breeze, the subtle rhythm of the wind whispering through the garden, and the frantic, hopeful beat of my own heart. We began to move slowly, awkwardly at first. His steps were hesitant, unsure, as though he'd forgotten how to navigate the world with anything other than brute force. But I persisted, offering gentle encouragement, holding on tight and willing him to trust. And then, something extraordinary happened. Magic, palpable and undeniable, filled the air. The garden shimmered with an ethereal glow. Tiny lights, like miniature stars liberated from the earth, rose from the ground, dancing and swirling around us. The roses, as if awakened from a long slumber, opened their velvety petals wider, releasing their intoxicating fragrance into the night air. The atmosphere thrummed with sweetness and warmth. And from somewhere far away, deep within the very heart of the castle, a melody drifted through the breeze, not from instruments or voices, but from the building itself, a song of hope and longing etched into its very foundation. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. You're not like anyone I've ever met, he said quietly, his voice laced with a newfound wonder. I smiled, offering him a genuine, heartfelt smile. I'm just a girl, I replied. One who was forgotten just like you. His face softened, the harsh lines of sorrow momentarily erased. The pain didn't vanish entirely, but it seemed to recede, pushed back by a wave of something akin to hope. We danced until the stars began to fade from the sky, until the moon sank behind the distant trees, casting long shadows across the awakening landscape. And when we finally stopped, breathless and exhilarated, he offered me a formal bow, a gesture that spoke of a forgotten grace, a hidden nobility, a real bow like a prince. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, for seeing me, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly valued. I felt chosen, not as a means to an end, but for myself. And somehow, deep within my soul, I knew that this story wasn't just about curses or roses or beasts. It was about the long and arduous journey towards becoming whole, towards embracing our flaws and celebrating our strengths. The next morning, I awoke in the softest bed I had ever known. Silk sheets, smooth and cool against my skin. A pillow that cradled my head, its fabric imbued with the faint, lingering scent of roses. Sunlight streamed through the heavy velvet curtains, painting the room in a warm, golden glow. For a fleeting few seconds, I forgot everything: the curse, the sprawling mansion, the haunting memories of my past. But then I glanced at the ornate mirror hanging on the wall, and reality crashed back with a vengeance. Something was happening. The surface of the glass rippled like disturbed water, as though a hidden world was struggling to break through. Then, slowly, a face began to materialize within the swirling depths. It was a woman. She had long, flowing silver hair that cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall of moonlight. Her skin was pale and luminous, like polished alabaster, and her eyes glowed with an ancient power and a profound, immeasurable sadness. Her smile was gentle, almost maternal, filled with a bittersweet understanding. Blessing, she said softly, her voice echoing in my mind like the chime of distant bells. You're changing everything. I froze, instinctively stepping back, fear gripping me like icy fingers. Who are you? I stammered, my voice trembling. I am the guardian of this place, she replied, her gaze unwavering. This castle was built on magic, love, and sacrifice, but it has been asleep until you arrived. Why me? I whispered, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. I'm just a girl nobody wanted, a girl they sold for money. Her eyes softened, radiating a wave of empathy that resonated deep within my soul. No, she said, her voice filled with conviction. You are more than that. You possess the rarest of gifts. A heart that sees beyond the surface, beyond the illusions and the superficial trappings. A heart that can love even after experiencing unimaginable pain. I felt my eyes sting with unshed tears. You're the one who cursed him, aren't you? I accused, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Her smile dimmed, the light in her eyes flickering like a dying ember. Yes, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He needed to change. And for a long time he refused to acknowledge his flaws, to confront his demons. I thought the curse would break with time, but pride runs deep. I swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of her words. Do you think I can really break it? I asked, desperation clinging to my voice. She didn't answer right away, allowing the silence to stretch between us, thick with unspoken possibilities and terrifying uncertainties. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice soft and melancholic. You've already begun to, but I don't even know if I love him. I confessed, the truth tumbling from my lips with a raw honesty. I know I don't hate him. That is enough, she said, a hint of something akin to hope returning to her eyes. For now. Then her expression darkened, a shadow of foreboding creeping across her features. But beware, Blessing. Darkness is coming. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean? I asked, fear tightening its grip around my heart. But she was already fading, her image dissolving back into the swirling depths of the mirror. Trust your heart, blessing, she whispered, her voice growing fainter with each passing second. It will know what your mind fears. Then the mirror stilled, the surface returning to its placid reflection. Only my own image stared back at me, pale, uncertain, and undeniably afraid. I turned away from it, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum, the guardian's words echoing in my mind. 2 days had passed since my encounter with the woman in the mirror, the enigmatic guardian of the castle. I hadn't seen Coda since the night of our dance. Mira told me he was troubled, his mood somber and withdrawn. He wandered the halls alone, his gaze fixed on the distant sky, lost in thoughts he refused to share. He ate nothing, spoke to no one. His silence a heavy burden that weighed upon the entire castle. And me? I was consumed by fear, not of him, not of the beast that lurked beneath the surface, but of the unfamiliar feelings that stirred within me. What if I said the wrong thing? What if I made everything worse? What if I simply wasn't enough to break the curse? So, I threw myself into mindless activity, seeking refuge in the mundane tasks that occupied my days. I helped Mira with the laundry, meticulously folding the crisp linens. I cleaned the dusty corners of the house, scrubbing until the neglected surfaces sparkled with a newfound life, as though the house itself was breathing again. Then, one afternoon, a harried butler burst into the laundry room, his face flushed with exertion. He clutched something in his hand, his fingers trembling. "This just arrived," he said, his voice breathless. "It's for you." He thrust the object towards me. His eyes filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. It was a letter. I recognized the familiar scrawl on the front, even though I couldn't decipher the individual letters. But I knew, with a sickening certainty, who it was from. My mother. The envelope emanated a familiar scent, a potent cocktail of dust, wood smoke, and kerosene, the unmistakable aroma of home. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. I looked at Mira, my voice barely a whisper. "Can you read it?" pleaded. "Please." She nodded, her expression softening with sympathy. With gentle hands, she carefully opened the letter, her eyes moving slowly across the page. Her face transformed as she read, her initial softness giving way to a profound sadness, then settling into a quiet resignation. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. "It says," she began, her voice hesitant, "Blessing, your brother Collins is sick again. The surgery helped, but the doctors say he needs more treatment. We don't have the money anymore. Please, we beg you, talk to the rich man who married you. Ask him for help. You are our only hope. Your mother." That was all. "No, how are you? No, we miss you. No, we're sorry. Just another request, another demand, another cold, calculated use." As though I was still a possession, a commodity to be exploited, a means to an end. As though I was still a rope for them to climb, a bridge to be crossed, a tool to be wielded. My fingers curled into tight fists on the edge of the wooden table, the knuckles turning white with the force of my grip. Mira folded the letter gently, her movements deliberate and careful, as though the fragile piece of paper might shatter into a million pieces. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, forcing a semblance of composure. "I'm fine," I managed to choke out, but my voice cracked, betraying the turmoil that raged within me. But I wasn't fine, not even close. That night, drawn by an irresistible force, I found my way back to the rose garden. The same ancient sycamore tree, the same silvery moon hanging in the inky sky, and there he was, Coda, standing alone in the shadows, still shrouded in his impenetrable silence. But when he saw me approach, he didn't turn away, didn't retreat into the darkness. His blue eyes, usually so guarded, met mine with an almost palpable intensity. "Blessing," he said in my mind, his voice low and weary, resonating with a profound sadness. "Thank you for caring for me." He stood beneath the sprawling branches of the sycamore tree, the same spot where we had shared our tentative dance, his white fur gleaming silver in the moonlight, his blue eyes glowing with an inner light that seemed to pierce the darkness. "I'm not just cursed to look like a beast," he said, his voice laced with a bitter self-awareness. "I'm cursed to live half a life, haunted by guilt, silence, and loneliness." He looked up at the stars, as though seeking solace in their distant, unblinking gaze. "But something is changing." I didn't speak, couldn't find the words to articulate the complex emotions that swirled within me. "The night we danced," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "I almost changed. I felt it. I was so close. But the magic slipped away again." Then he turned to me, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an almost desperate intensity. "You are the key, Blessing. Your heart, your pain, your hope. They are stronger than any magic." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. "But I don't understand," I stammered, my voice trembling with confusion. "I'm nobody." He stepped closer, his massive form looming over me, yet his presence radiating not threat, but a profound tenderness. "No," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "You are everything they never saw, everything they crushed, and still you shine." Then his voice shifted, a note of urgency creeping into his tone. "Something is coming," he said, his gaze fixed on something unseen in the distance. "A trial, a moment where you'll have to choose me or your freedom." I froze, the blood running cold in my veins. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "Not yet," he said, his voice laced with regret. "But when that moment comes, I hope your heart leads you right." In that moonlit garden, surrounded by the intoxicating scent of roses and haunted by unspoken fears, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My heart wasn't mine alone anymore. It was inextricably intertwined with his, bound together by an invisible thread of hope, love, and an unshakable belief in the power of redemption. That night, the sky turned black, devoid of stars and moon, swallowed by clouds that were heavy and churning, like something ancient and malevolent had awakened from a long slumber. Then the storm descended, unleashing its fury upon the castle and the surrounding land. The wind howled like a pack of ravenous wolves, tearing at the trees and rattling the windows. Rain pounded against the stone walls like angry fists. Thunder cracked the sky open, illuminating the landscape in brief, terrifying flashes. Couldn't sleep. The storm felt alive, sentient, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to target the castle itself. Hungry, angry, and filled with an insatiable rage. Then, a knock on my door. Not Mira's gentle tap, but a sharp, insistent rap that sent a jolt of fear through my veins. It was Jake, the master's right-hand man. His face was pale, his eyes wide with alarm. His voice was urgent, barely above a whisper. "Come with me," he said, his gaze darting nervously around the room. Now, my heart leaped into my throat, pounding against my ribs. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. "It's happening," he said, his voice laced with panic. "The storm, it's feeding the curse. He's losing control." He led me through the candlelit halls, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. We descended down a narrow corridor I'd never seen before, hidden behind a tapestry that depicted a scene of ancient battles. The walls pulsed with strange symbols, glowing softly in the darkness, their meaning indecipherable. At the end of the corridor, a massive door made of steel loomed before us, carved with intricate markings that looked as though they had been burned into the metal. This wasn't just a door. It was a barrier, a prison designed to contain something dangerous. Jake pushed the heavy door open with a grunt, revealing the scene within. Inside, Coda was thrashing around like a caged animal, but not the Coda I knew. He was bigger, twice his normal size, his muscles bulging beneath his thick fur. His fur was streaked with silver lightning, crackling with static energy. His eyes glowed with an unnatural gold, burning with a wild, untamed power. He wasn't pacing. He was shaking, growling, fighting something deep inside himself. A battle waged against a force that threatened to consume him entirely. "He's resisting," Jake said, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm and the guttural growls that emanated from Coda. "But the storm, it strengthens the curse." I stepped forward, my legs trembling, my heart pounding against my ribs. I was terrified, but an even stronger emotion, a deep, primal urge to help him, pulled me closer. "Can he hear me?" I whispered to Jake, my voice shaking. "Yes." Jake nodded frantically. "He knows you're here." Coda's golden eyes locked onto mine, burning with a desperate plea. There was panic in them, pain, and a desperate fear of losing control. He didn't want to hurt me, but the beast inside him was rising, fueled by the storm's relentless energy. I knelt beside him, reaching out a tentative hand. "Coda," I said, my voice shaking. He let out a tortured growl, a deep, guttural sound that shook the floor. "I'm here," he managed to force out, his voice strained and distorted by the beast within. His body trembled violently, convulsing with a force that seemed to threaten to tear him apart. "Touch him," Jake said urgently. "Speak to him, hold him, anchor him." I reached out, my hand trembling, and laid it gently on his fur. It was hot, electric, alive with a raw power that both terrified and fascinated me. "You're not alone," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "You don't have to fight this by yourself anymore." He let out a tortured howl that echoed through the chamber, raw and broken, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. "I see you," I said, my voice louder now, more confident. "Not the beast, not the curse, you." His breathing slowed, just a little. The golden light in his eyes flickered, momentarily dimming. "I'm not afraid," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "I choose to stay." The wind outside howled louder, as though responding to my defiance. The candles flickered wildly, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The symbols on the walls pulsed like a heartbeat, their meaning still hidden, but their energy undeniable. And then, everything stilled. The growling stopped abruptly, the shaking subsided, and Coda collapsed beside me, his breathing ragged, but calm, alive. By dawn the storm had passed. The sky was gray and still, like it had cried itself out, exhausted by its own fury. I stayed by Coda's side until his breathing returned to normal, until the wild, untamed light faded from his eyes, replaced by a glimmer of the man I had come to know. He didn't transform back into his human form, but something had changed. He looked lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Not free, not yet, but closer than he had been before. Jake placed a warm blanket around my shoulders, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You did it," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "No," I replied softly, shaking my head. "He did it. He just needed someone to believe in him." Coda stirred. His glowing blue eyes met mine, just for a moment, then closed peacefully. He drifted back into sleep, his face relaxed and serene. Jake walked me back to my room, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. At the door he paused, turning to face me, his expression thoughtful. "You gave him something no spell ever could," he said, his voice filled with a quiet understanding. "Love without fear, without force. Is the curse breaking?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a quiet nod, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I've been here since the beginning," he said, "and this is the closest he's ever come." He bowed his head in a gesture of respect, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I closed the door behind me, my heart full of something new, something stronger than just hope. It was faith, a deep, unwavering belief in the power of love, the power of forgiveness, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of curses. The next morning I went to check on Coda. He looked tired, but calm, his breathing steady, his eyes no longer burning with wild magic, just sadness, quiet and profound. When he saw me, he smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for staying, for believing, for saving me from myself." I stepped closer, drawn to him by an invisible force. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. He didn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder. Then, finally, he looked at me, really looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. That was the final test. I froze, my blood running cold. "Final test," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Not of strength, not of blood, but of the heart. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and purposeful, his voice filled with something ancient and heavy, a weight of centuries. "Tonight you'll see my truth, the part of me no one else has ever survived." A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the room. "Coda? What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his voice softer now, more intimate, as though he were confiding a secret that could shatter the world. "Don't be afraid of what you see," he said, his blue eyes pleading. "Just remember who I am." That evening, I was summoned to the great hall. The doors swung open on their own, creaking ominously as they revealed the scene within. The room was shrouded in darkness, lit only by candles that floated through the air like ethereal stars, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. Coda stood in the center of the room, his figure still and silent, waiting for me. His body shimmered with strange glowing markings, symbols that pulsed like veins of light beneath his skin. I stepped inside, my heart pounding against my ribs, each breath a struggle. "Coda," I said, my voice barely a whisper in the vastness of the hall. He lifted his head, his blue eyes brighter than ever, glowing with an otherworldly power. His voice echoed, not just in the room, but in my mind, resonating with an ancient energy. "This is who I truly am." And then it began. His body rose from the floor, levitating in the air. Light, brilliant and blinding, wrapped around him like living fire, swirling and coalescing into a vortex of raw energy. His shape shifted, contorting and transforming. Not into a dog, not into a man, but into something else entirely, something holy, something cursed, something that defied definition. Wings burst from his back, glowing with golden light, their feathers shimmering like spun gold. Horns curled from his temples, glistening like crystal, radiating an almost unbearable power. His hands sparked with electricity, crackling with raw energy. His skin glowed with intricate markings, symbols that I couldn't read, but knew were ancient and potent. He was floating now, suspended in the air, a being of pure energy, a creature of myth and legend. Not a prince, not a beast, but something far greater, something far more terrifying. A god, a demon, a man all in one. "Do you still see me, Blessing?" His voice echoed through the hall, resonating with a power that shook me to my very core. Tears filled my eyes, blurring my vision. My chest ached with a mixture of fear and awe. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling, but resolute. "I see you." He lowered himself to the ground, his glowing form shaking with barely contained power. "Then come, end it." I walked forward, my heart pounding against my ribs, each step a conscious choice, a declaration of my unwavering faith. "I choose you," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "In every form, in every shadow, forever." And in that moment the curse cracked. The wind rose, not from outside the castle walls, but from within its very foundation, swirling and howling through the halls like a tormented spirit. The candles blew sideways, their flames flickering wildly. The golden markings on the walls shimmered like fire, illuminating the room with an almost unbearable intensity. Coda dropped to his knees, groaning in agony, light pouring from his chest, from his eyes, from his hands, a torrent of raw energy unleashed upon the world. I ran to him, heedless of the danger, and held him in my arms as the room shook around us, threatening to collapse in on itself. "Coda, hold on," I cried, my voice cracking with desperation. He clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. The markings on his body flared, then faded into silence. A soft, golden glow spread across the floor, enveloping the entire hall in a warm, ethereal light. The floating candles stilled, their flames burning bright and steady. The trembling stopped, and the wind died down to a gentle whisper. And Coda collapsed in my arms, his body limp and lifeless. But this time he wasn't glowing. There were no horns, no wings, no symbols of magic or power. Just skin, just breath, just the beating of a heart. Just a man, warm, real, alive. He opened his eyes slowly, his gaze meeting mine. Still blue, but softer, clearer, filled with a love and gratitude that transcended words. He whispered, his voice shaky and hoarse, but undeniably human. "I'm free." Tears spilled down my cheeks, tears of joy, tears of relief, tears of a happiness I had never thought possible. "We both are," I whispered back, my voice choked with emotion. He laughed, a soft, amazed sound, as though he still couldn't believe what had just happened. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You really did it." I held his face in my hands and smiled, a smile that radiated from deep within my soul. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We did." From that moment on, everything changed. The castle lit up with a newfound joy, as though spring had arrived after a long and brutal winter. The staff smiled freely, their faces radiant with happiness. Doors that had once been locked and barred swung open, revealing hidden passages and forgotten treasures. I was no longer a prisoner, trapped within the castle walls. I was a guest, a friend, a confidant, a queen, as Mira liked to whisper with a mischievous glint in her eyes. And Coda, he walked the halls with a newfound confidence, his steps light and free, not as a beast, not as a legend, but as a man, no longer afraid of the storm, no longer haunted by the ghosts of his past. I learned to read, to write, to speak the languages of the world. I danced barefoot in the garden, my laughter echoing through the halls. I laughed until my stomach hurt, until tears streamed down my face, until I could barely breathe. I looked in the mirror and saw a girl who had once been invisible, a girl who had been forgotten, a girl who had been deemed worthless, now radiant with an inner beauty that shone brighter than any crown. I was healing piece by piece, day by day. I was home, and then, a knock on the door. Mira burst into my room, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Blessing," she said breathlessly, her voice trembling. "You need to come now." She didn't wait for a response. She grabbed my hand and pulled me down a hallway I had never entered before. A corridor shrouded in shadows, its atmosphere heavy with a sense of foreboding. The West Wing. The air was colder here, colder than anywhere else in the castle, and thick with a palpable tension that made my skin crawl. When we stepped into the room at the end of the hall, I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. My parents were standing there. My mother clutched her worn old handbag tight, as though it held her last shred of hope. Her face was etched with lines of worry and desperation. My father wore a smile that I recognized all too well, fake, greedy, and utterly devoid of genuine affection. "Blessing?" my mother said gently, her voice laced with a false tenderness, as though she hadn't once sold me to a stranger for a handful of coins. "We sent letters, you didn't answer, so we came." I didn't move, couldn't find the words to respond. The years of pain, of neglect, of silent suffering welled up inside me, threatening to choke me. "Collins is sick again," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "The doctors say it's worse this time. We need help, please." I took a step back, recoiling from her fabricated display of concern. "No." My father stepped forward, attempting to smooth his voice, to regain control of the situation. "We heard your dog man has treasure rooms," he said, his eyes gleaming with avarice. "Gold, jewels, all kinds of things. Show us where they are." And then Coda entered the room, not as the beast, not as the prince, but fully human, fully calm, his presence radiating a quiet strength that filled the room. But his eyes were ice, colder than I had ever seen them. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, his voice laced with a dangerous undercurrent. My mother's eyes widened, her gaze shifting between Coda and me, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. "Wait, you married a man? I thought it was a dog." I looked at her, my face devoid of emotion. No tears, no trembling, no pleas for understanding, just a cold, hard truth. "You sold me to a dog," I said, my voice flat and toneless. "And that's the only reason the curse broke. So, thank you," I continued, my voice filled with a bitter sarcasm, "for showing me what I had to escape." My father stepped forward, trying to smooth his voice, to regain control of the situation. "We're still your parents, Blessing," he said, his tone condescending. "We love you. We made mistakes. But..." My voice shook, but it didn't break. The years of pent-up anger and resentment surged within me, giving me the strength to finally confront the past. "You didn't love me," I said, my voice ringing with conviction. "You used me, and I'm not yours anymore." Coda stepped closer, his hand resting protectively at the small of my back, his touch steady and reassuring. "You need to leave," he told them, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." My mother's face twisted into a mask of anger and resentment. "You ungrateful child," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. My father's eyes darkened with a flicker of rage. He raised his hand as if he might strike me, but Coda moved first, his reaction lightning fast. One step, no roar, no violence, just a silent, unwavering display of power. "If you touch her again," he said, his voice low and menacing, "I will forget mercy." For the first time they looked afraid, truly afraid. They saw the power that radiated from Coda, the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, and they understood that he was not a man to be trifled with. Coda didn't need to shout, didn't need to transform, didn't need to prove anything. He simply stood his ground, a silent guardian, a protector. And I stood taller, bolstered by his strength, emboldened by his unwavering support. The guards arrived, summoned by a silent command. Tall, silent men dressed in black, their faces impassive. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to convey the unspoken threat. They escorted my parents out of the castle, their movements swift and efficient. No one looked back. Coda didn't speak for a while after, his silence a heavy presence that filled the room. He simply walked me back to my room, his touch gentle, his gaze unwavering. His silence said everything, conveying a depth of understanding and compassion that words could never capture. At the door, I looked up at him, my heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He nodded, offering me a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine," he said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "But more importantly, you're safe now. You'll never be treated like that again." Then he leaned down and kissed my forehead, a soft, steady gesture of comfort and affection. We stood there in that quiet moment, like two people who had once been shattered, slowly learning how to piece themselves back together, how to find solace in each other's arms. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly valued, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was never going back to the darkness that had once consumed me. One morning, Coda led me back to the rose garden, the place where it had all begun, the place where we had first connected, the place where our destinies had become intertwined. The sun was warm on my skin, the sky a brilliant blue, and the flowers were in full bloom.